Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. As we mentioned in our previous Kame House stream upon return from Combo Breaker, we expect to be taking a slightly different approach to stream content, but not too heavily so. Today, therefore, we're mostly going to be talking about things while on the same match setup as usual. But when it comes to talking about things in matchups intended to help players, especially with specific things that need to be repeated and learned in the long term, we're expecting to spend a lot more time talking in chat about it. This will allow the players to more easily see what's going on and review it as need be. Therefore, you can expect the stream to be a little bit quieter overall. But that doesn't say that there won't be certain things at least that are talked about. After all, we're dealing with a lot of fundamentals for this game today. And those don't come cheap. This game has been through a few changes since we got the initial release of it. Many of them were intended to help change the pace of the game, and they do a decent job of that in a lot of cases. Overall, though, the multiple interactions that have changed lead to a couple of different ways of playing the game that were not really as available or as strong during the first year of the game's release. If you wish to join us, we are having a neither stays on US East Coast Lobby. You can find us in Circle Match Priority Lobby 02. And you're looking for me, Rillian, the red hit in front of Kame House. The ring does have a passcode, but as with all our lobbies and so on, the passcode is 2717. Well, whenever it can't be 2_MK. The basic principle mnemonic that we gave at the very beginning when we were teaching people to play this game is the concept of the mashup. First you block, then you deflect, when you don't know what else to do, then you use a meter. And when that's not helping, assist. That's hard backing. Oh, maybe another one. Generally, every week we mention the fact that our current player hitting doesn't do certain things very often, if at all, i.e. stopping attacking. So, a lot of the time, whether or not one is effective at fighting her i.e. Android 21, has to do with more whether or not you understand where it is that she is going to be on the screen and how much damage you can do as a result, than much to do with actual direct defense. If your accuracy fails against an opponent who consistently attacks, the result is usually the same. In that sort of match, the BD mashup mnemonic makes a lot less sense to apply. And your actual skill with landing your combos or punishing moves becomes more important. It is actually for this reason that it is very good to practice your combos, and why it can lead to such success in situations that you would otherwise expect to be beaten by an opponent with relatively strong or relentless offense. If you have strong enough skill in neutral, and extremely long combos and control, your opponent functionally never gets to play much. You can always make sure to put them in the position you want at the end of your combo, and especially if they are the type to attack relentlessly, you know what is probably coming next. You have the tendency to win in neutral again, and depending on your skill at converting that hit in neutral into a big combo, the system repeats. The same does not go for when you have a player that mashes out on defense, as this is again not quite accuracy, but is at least somewhat predicated on not necessarily being in neutral and therefore not being sure that you have advantage. In fact, against that type of player, sometimes you don't want to go for pressure on wake up at all, as even if you were to bait an attack and expect to get a big punish out of it, they might use just a standing or crouching light on wake up and put themselves close to you instead. If you find that you're often getting into trouble due to doing this, but your skill in neutral is sufficient to get them opened up, and your skill at combos is sufficient to actually do damage once you do, you may just want to let them get up. And in this case, you need to think of BD mashup from the other side. Specifically, what resources your opponent has available in the first place. If they have a lot of meter, but don't have any good uses for that meter in neutral, letting them get up is often the safest thing you can do for yourself. This is also strategically a question of whether or not you have assists available, and what your assists can do both on your opponent's wake up and in your own pressure. At a relatively deep psychological level, it also causes a certain type of opponent to be particularly extra mashy when they do realize that you intend to pressure them on wake up, as all the rest of the time you back off, it's easy to subconsciously get pulled into the idea that, well, they normally back off, so they stay close to me this time, and that must mean that they are going to attack. Part of the usefulness of this last-minute sparking style thing is the damage output you gain from it. Sometimes you really want to delay it just so you have more meter to maximize the usage. You don't want to hit sparking too early to get your health back, but not be able to get any damage off it. We've often talked about how this game is much more so strategic than directly complex. The characters are simple, but the depth generally leads to a constantly shifting landscape of things you need to keep in mind and do in order to win. But what do you do against opponents who actually have good pressure and know what they're doing? Most of the time, that is the moment where the BD mashup makes the most sense, as you can learn some of parts of this pressure and therefore learn to deflect things. The important thing is to understand the changes in your opponent's mindset that come about as a result of you doing this. But again, as you can see, this is mostly about accuracy. Miss, and the opponent will begin their relentless assault. This isn't actually all that hard to deal with. We've seen in previous streams that generally this is about how much one wants to use Frieza and actually play a keep out. In this case, I don't particularly want to play keep out because there's a better way to deal with this situation. In a long-term strategic situation, you can often put your opponent into mental states where it's easier to control them and make them do certain things you want. Your accuracy still matters quite a lot, but the general rule most people use in games like this is the idea that once you've gotten and done something twice, your opponent will expect that you change or that they will be able to beat you on the third one. Missed it. It can be a good way to practice against certain types of opponent, as manipulating the way they play feeds more easily into your later practice for combos. This is because, generally, when a player faces a situation where they have been put at a heavy disadvantage, they remember this situation, and the longer your combo is, the longer they have to think about it. If you want to then go for more pressure or another setup of the same situation, it helps if you don't have to have that interaction too often. If you can defeat opponents in 3 mix-ups, your life is generally easier than if you need 6. On 2 levels. Obviously, the first is they have less chances to guess right and get out. But it also changes the amounts of time that they have spent thinking about it and their likely responses to the same situation. Most people cannot, in fact, be random enough to be sure that they will get away with certain things. This means it can be to your advantage when you have enough health to get through it, sometimes to simply let your opponent take a risky response to something based on it being the correct one. For example, using a move that your opponent can punish with Dragon Rush primarily, or even using the Super Dash and risking getting hit with their 2H when they don't have meter or when you have a lot of health to soak it up. Since so much of this game is based on setting up really good situations to do a lot of damage, any chance you have to trick your opponent into falling for one of those situations can lead to a lot of advantage. It can therefore be worth it sometimes to set up an opponent at a point where you have health to take the setup but don't have resources to do anything too flashy, to increase the chances that when you do go for your flashiest option, in some cases and for some characters right out, flat out touch of death scenarios, that you do manage to land these. After all, it really doesn't matter how much damage your opponent manages to do to you if you can control that amount. In the end, I'm not dead and they are, is approximately the goal here. This gets better and better as you get used to playing neutral better, meaning that you have a much more control over when you first take damage or situations in which it happens. Of course, there is also something to be considered about whether or not a given character is good at setting up certain things to begin with. But this is exactly the sort of situation we're talking about. Playing too safely here could result in a character like Krillin slowly chipping you to death by running away, by making the right call all the time, or simply by using senzu beans to outlast you in some way. This is something you absolutely don't want to happen, but it can happen. And one of the only ways to avoid it is to use all the resources you have available, get a setup where the opponent thinks, okay, well, we're playing neutral normally, nothing risky is happening, or feels particularly effective because they've managed a thing or two. Occasionally, therefore, it makes sense to get hit in order to make your opponent play differently and therefore be able to be opened up. Going for safe options in fighting games as a whole tends to not lead to this. If you generally go with the safest option you have, it is also often one of the least advantageous options you have. There are a few characters where safe movement leads to mix-ups, but even then, a lot of the time the mix-ups are the type where one of the moves you use after it has high, what they call proration, reducing the amount of damage you can do, or suffers terribly if the opponent takes a very risky option. It is that suffers terribly situation that you sometimes want.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess! Piccolo-san, 行きますよ! 待たせた。Get ready.
There's a good example of one. Trunks does have good damage off this, but it's not crippling damage. It's not going to make Piccolo dead or make me worry particularly about what happens. That, for example, is more or less more of the same. I'm not concerned about Mitsuko taking that damage, as if I can manage well enough in neutral She's just going to recover it all. Of course, it helps to have characters that have a lot of tricky options on top of that. Understanding your opponent's current psychological state, even as it shifts at very high speed in a match, is important in all fighting games, but particularly in this one, because you don't get a lot of chances to land your initial attack, and even poking at your opponent can sometimes be a difficult prospect.
It's time to face your opponent! Are you ready? Fight it out!
In games like this with delayed air dashes that you can do at timings you prefer to, you can give your opponent a lot of stress as well. In fact, even delaying your buttons can help with this as well, because there are certain forms of fuzzy blocking, especially in Marvel-style games like this one, where the opponent will eventually jump back, notice they have jumped back, and try to hit a button. Except that you've already hit one, you were also just delaying your own hit until they left. Or for no reason in particular, actually. As the only time it generally tends to hurt you is if they read that you're going to delay it, or if their intent is to backdash out of the situation. In other words, as long as you don't expect your opponent to backdash away from you in a pressure situation, there's really very little harm most of the time in just delaying your button. This is partially because of a change relative to calling assists while in block.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Piccolo-san! Ready? Go!
Another thing you can learn to do against at least some opponents is to gauge their level of offense versus defense mindset based on the range that you two are at the time. Creating a spacing where they are going to let you get away with certain things can be an important asset. One good example is that here, I am trying to frustrate my opponent into being more mashy in certain situations. Knowing this, they of course will be at least somewhat less likely to mash buttons, but they're not necessarily in a position where they will let me get away with the Dragon Rush. This is the perfect time, however, for Piccolo, because Piccolo effectively has the command grab. You can notice that the result of that is again that the opponent jumps back when one approaches, again to get rid of the Dragon Rush as an option. But that is where the delayed poke comes in. Whether or not your character has a good delayed poke is really the biggest thing that makes the decision here. Freeze's is decent. However, 18 has the best one, as her 5L is combo is the most effective for the purpose. She also has enough range on certain things that if the opponent does not immediately counterattack, she will clip them when they try to get back to the ground. Fast follow.
ちょっとやりすぎたかな。大丈夫。僕はもう子供じゃありませんから。
Get ready for battle! Are you ready? Let's go!
I haven't seen this stage in a while. And there you see demonstrated one of the other tools you can actually use to use at least certain characters' delayed chase buttons. Jump back, super dash. This is, however, among, again, the riskiest options you have available to you, not even because it will get hit by 2H, but simply because depending on the delayed timing, Super Dash does in fact collide with other hits if it happens on the exact frame, meaning that your opponent might not have to do anything. They might simply have delayed their own button enough that your Super Dash just collides with it, and this tends to leave you at much bigger disadvantage than them. Once you get used to this idea of delaying buttons, it often tends to work its way into your neutral game as well. The result is that you get better at faking people out and playing certain forms of neutral. The opponent can counter this by using their assists more often, set you up, as most of the time if you just sit there and play neutral quietly and normally like you do in other more grounded games, depending on the opposing character team, you're just going to get hit by the assist, and even if you don't take any damage, they will certainly get into a favorable position. The delay buttons are also, though, a good way to get the player used to the idea that not everything has to be done right away in order to be effective. In general, one is much more likely to lose out or get into trouble because of mashing buttons as fast as you can, compared to, oh, I'm going to take a little bit longer before I hit this button. Especially if your defense was in some way good enough to stand up. And there's that accuracy problem. And here are the dregs of it, but not enough. But you did need to clip a little bit more to get that killing level 3, unfortunately, for him. But you can definitely see a lot of the shift in tactics that comes about as a result of this. But what do you do when you don't know how to win neutral? And that is actually one of the bigger questions in fighting games as a whole. But in this game, because neutral can just end relatively quickly, it becomes a really big question and a really big problem. That brings us back to the auto combo method. As we mentioned before, one of the easiest ways to deal with the mobility difficulties of your characters while still playing reasonably well is to use the character's auto combo as a way of closing space in a situation you understand. Usually it is the light auto combo you want to use for this, as the medium one can have some holes. Not holes that necessarily lead to a lot of problems, but still something. Oh, that missed. Understanding the range that your auto combo leaves you at when you hit it at certain spaces also lets you set your opponent up for, again, delayed hits. After people learn to recognize certain spaces, they will not immediately go for counterattacks, as most light auto combos in the game can be stopped at a point where your opponent only gets to check you. And depending on which buttons they check you with or what characters you're playing, they may not want to do this. They want to move or rethink the situation. Once they've realized that nothing's going to happen, they need to take an action quickly. Usually the answer is once again backdash, but depending on your range, even the backdash may technically fail if you use the correct chase move. If you have enough health to do this and risk the chase move, then by all means go for a delayed beam, delayed stand heavy. For some characters, even more like committed moves will actually be just as good, if not better. There's something we have not really discussed in the context of our Kame House streams before, as it's something that you only really care about once you have definitely made sure you have the skill to set up neutral and to want to play it. Without those two things being true, it's very difficult to get much out of this. Setting up neutral is something you can learn on a technical level. Wanting to play neutral is a psychological change that can be hard to get. In fact, we can definitely say that some of the team is still working on that, the desire to just get into a position where playing neutral is good for them. Or realizing that, you know what, this situation doesn't benefit me if I start to go in for various reasons. But once you have decided, I want to play neutral, you sometimes need a way to shift the spaces or timings that things are going on. You can't just walk forward and inch backward against certain characters, as they have long sliding lows, or other tools that require instant reactions, but they wouldn't be able to use those tools if you were a little closer, for example. There are not a lot of characters like that, but there are a few. And it is at this point that understanding how to use your auto combos, and in some cases even your overhead, to make your opponent think about certain things in the neutral stance can help you. You can watch high-level play and easily tell how this works, as the highest level players have very obviously developed ways of playing the neutral game. The willingness to use the auto combo to move forward also helps in a situation we've just seen. There are certain situations in which one wants to chase the opponent with the expectation that they're going to come toward you and probably get hit. And most of us are tempted to use Dragon Rush or beams for this purpose, but the beam doesn't have a payoff, and if the opponent moves in a particular way after the Dragon Rush, it becomes a risk, as you are stuck there recovering from it. The first hit of a forward-moving auto combo, and sometimes even the second hit of such an auto combo, don't necessarily have these problems.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
In short, in that situation where you need to track the opponent forward, but you don't particularly want to put yourself at risk, hitting the first hit of your light auto combo, if it's a good forward-moving one, is often a good option if you don't think your opponent is going to, or sometimes cannot, instantly counterattack. It is actually because of this that learning to use your assist in scrambles is important, because it tends to beat people doing this.
It's all or nothing! Let's go!
軽いね。こいつはどうだい。食らえ。食らっときな。なるほど。それだな。手を抜いているのか。はっはっはっ。そらこっち。どこ見てんのさ。はっ抜け。さてそろそろ。まだまだ。感謝なんかしてないからな。無駄だ。くらえ。そろそろ。こいつはどうだ。悪夢はいいか。うぞ。やるな。うぞ。なんだ。そろそろ。俺が殺してやろう。登場ね。よっ食らっときな。行くよ。よっ食らっときな。今度は本気でやらせてもらうぞ。そこね。やるね。終わりだ。この私にバリーやる話。こういうのも僕は優しい。お前。
And right, that's a hit.
ちょっと脅してやるか。まだよ。なるほど。そこで冗談じゃない。いいだろ。そうやってやる。よし。絶対に許さんぞ。冗談じゃない。そこでその調子。やばいですよ。その調子。これにはそこでいますよ。
俺が殺してやろう。
今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。早く勝負をつけなきゃね。行くぞ。今度は俺が相手だ。どこへ殺す。楽しめそうだ。どこへ行くんだ。その程度のパワーで俺を倒せると思っていたのか。気が高まる。溢れる。
Similarly, learning to play riskily in situations where you're training can be important, simply because there are opponents that you will not be able to open up without playing at least somewhat riskily. While it's hard to call understanding that you should do crazy things against your opponent a skill, after all it is, as they say, a hard read, it is something that people do build up over time, and at least slightly skew their success rate. Again, it's mostly psychology, and if you find that you're misjudging your opponent, then that is something you have to work on too. However, this isn't to say that you should just play riskily all the time, because you do have to be very aware of the fact that sometimes the only read you can get on your opponent is that they're not going to fall for anything you try. This is why safe play can be such a strong tool. Particularly after a KO, where you usually have the use of your assist and your opponent does not have the use of theirs. Or at least has one less than you do, hopefully. Of course, this does depend on your team. As one can note, while mine does have some options for this, they're not generally the most assist-oriented team. We previously discussed on one of these streams that a large part of the change in playstyle that made me more effective with them was recognizing this and shifting to a style where they mostly just come in at the end of each other's combos to set up certain situations, as none of them are particularly good at ending air combos except Frieza. And even Frieza is not necessarily setting up the situation you want. It's all good to put someone in a death ball and send them to the outside of the screen, but if you have the option to get them in the corner with Piccolo or 18, you should probably take it. As that is technically more effective than trying to use either of those characters to cover your approach. Therefore, if for whatever reason you wanted to, you're going to have to do it. Coming out the conversion. Bardock in particular has some trouble playing neutral, despite all of his very good moves for keeping the opponent at a particular distance, and relatively safely approaching them. As soon as the opponent has either too many assists or too many resources in terms of meter, playing Bardock in this way becomes much less effective.
It's time to face your opponent! Get ready! Go!
すぐに終わらせてやる。さて、この私にバリーをその調子。そろそろ死んだりだろ。ほら、長いですよ。ちょっと脅してやるか。虫けらが。覚悟の足を持ってしまう。終わりじゃない。終わりよ。こっちだ。終わりだ。了解だ。そら。行くぞ。やるね。行くよ。そら。や。行くぞ。来い。静かをしまった。1対1なら共通。
外さないわ。冗談じゃない。驚いたよ。行くよ17号。分かった。痛いわね。じゃあね。バイ。やめた。あんたと。
喜びちょうだい。
まだ。そら。この手。行くよ。やあ、食らっときな。感謝なんかしてないよ。
さて、
あいつしまった。
さて、
やあ、そら黙っときな。逃げたか。
今度は俺が相手だ。地球ごと消えてないじゃねえ。そんなもんか。行くぞ。では諸君、ごきげんよう。もう少し楽しませてくれると思ったが、見込み違いだったようだな。
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
初めから全力でかかってくる。
Are you ready? Go!
As we did start the stream later today, there is the consideration of whether or not we'll be going on for longer than usual. But this time it's not really seeming as if that's going to happen. Most likely therefore will be ending at our usual time of 10 Eastern. Here you see again the aforementioned difficulty Bardock can have due to the way his auto combo works. In this team, however, he has a lot of backup from his assists, and is technically the one in the team that deals best with that situation, in the assist department. If you're thinking pure tactics, this also means that he personally generally wants to fall fastest, as he has the most difficult super to land, despite it being extremely advantageous, and you don't really want Bardock to be the one left fighting with low resources and no assists. Even higher resources don't necessarily help him as a character as much as the others. You can also see the difficulties Bardock faces in situations like this, where he ends up being switched in, and therefore doesn't have assists available for anything he wants to do for the bit. The change to the fact that the game now does not let you simply mash assists out of block, though you can't necessarily consider them a nerf to this character, it did force you to play a little bit more directly, as you couldn't rely on pushing someone out to a space where Bardock had an advantage using just an assist. In this case, Bardock was lost, but we now have characters who are more let's call it equipped to play a certain type of neutral. They have the capacity to approach or not approach at the end of certain strings, some good flows that can be achieved from their overheads, and a couple instant jump style moves to help them out.
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Urori! 生きていたのか。
また一匹虫けらが死にに来たか。
So let's see all of that put together. Well, you know the brawling mirror tends to work out, so this is going to be rough on both sides. But only the more assist tends to come out on top. In this case, not so, as the first hit was landed. There's the action sequence. Well, this goes back to what we were mentioning before. This is again primarily about, can you keep that up in that scenario? If your opponent has long enough combos to keep you on your toes, it doesn't really matter as much if you have relentlessness or good mix-ups. They spend so much time hitting you that you never get to really think about opening them up very heavily. The addition of Goku being called to cover the entire ground space in the scramble just shifts it more in that direction. You can see, even though this really doesn't do that much damage, and then she did not go for the finish, so the sparking could help, the mental state is still different. One player spent a large amount of time being hit, and the other basically didn't. When your opponent feels more forced to keep up with you, it also helps you learn their tendencies faster. Fortunately, Cell's aerial mobility does work out at least a bit helpful in nearly every situation. But zoning with Goku 101 shifts everything around as well.
Showdown is about to begin!
There does come a point, however, where simply trying to outthink your opponent is not enough anymore. Not only must you react to everything going on, sometimes you just don't have time to track all that.
の僕だ。
虫けらちょっと脅してやる。この星もろとも貴様らをゴミにしてやる。終わりだ。行くぞ。
どうした。
終わりだ。
This, for example, is to just get the bashiness out of my opponent's system. As against Krillin, one doesn't need Piccolo. In that case, that hardly was quite incorrect, as I kind of need Piccolo against Gohan. Really could keep this up indefinitely. And the punishment for doing it on an opponent in that situation is not that great. Oh, I thought I'd activated that. Oh well. Oh no, I did. Right, okay.
勉強のやりすぎで弱くなっちまったみたいだね。
もしもっと腕を上げることができたら、また相手になってやると言っておいてくれ。
なんだ、もう終わりか。もう少し楽しめるかと思ったんだけどね。
Should be a great fight.
This team is really good at chasing down Vegeta's zoning, but less good at chasing down Boo's zoning. The question is whether or not playing Keep Away with Boo is a good idea to begin with, as it generally just gives the opponents a lot of opportunities to use their own assist to cover space. So again, it becomes a question of tactics. Bardock can give Trunks a lot of trouble in terms of reactions, but he often puts himself in situations where he can't really do much, and if he does get hit, he tends to take a lot of damage. Meaning that you have to very carefully ration how you use Bardock, and use the Boo Runaway zoning as a way to let Bardock recover health. Keeping the two tagging in and out consistently is generally a good way to handle this situation. With of course Vegeta to back them up when they just have a situation with both of them being low on health for some reason. to our usual notes about units, there are downsides to this whole long continuous attack thing, in that obviously there's more and more scaling, and while there is some shift now that does help, it's still mostly serving the same problem. We'll chalk this one up therefore to a complete lack of Vegeta Assist, as Vegeta Assist helps Bardock function as a zoner more, and further increases Blue's ability to stay out of trouble. From here it's usually downhill, as Broly has at least 3 ways of dealing with Vegeta. And without much meter on Vegeta's side, there's very little you can do about this. Additionally, having a good beam assist in the form of Super Saiyan Goku means that Vegeta doesn't really get to spend a lot of time doing any ground setups either. In other words, he can't really play ground neutral. And if forced to play aerial zoning, he's eventually going to get thrown off by Broly's power shell. Not to mention the fact that he has to deal with the armor regardless.
This should be a great fight! Are you ready? Fight! この攻撃だ！この攻撃だ！やってみせる！いいか！この攻撃だ！やってみせる！この攻撃だ！殺しまった！もう終わりか！この攻撃！
登場ね。大丈夫ですか？そこ。
Oh, can already hit.
相手だこれでどうだそうなんの行くぞなんのはっふっきゃー行くぞおいでトラップ行くぞしまった
On hit, first set of your auto combo can generally combo into nearly any other normal you want. This doesn't have a use against all characters, as a lot of them can just bat out of it. But with the right assists, you can make that a very credible threat. Both adult Gohan and Trunks are technically this type of assist, allowing Omni Rabbit to get much more mix-ups off of just Krillin's 5LL than most other characters. And the slip under. Once again, a matter of psychological understanding.
見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
Trunks' weaknesses in the matchup against Piccolo in 18 are relatively well handled by the assists here. Broly and Goku both force Piccolo to move into the air before he tries to do anything, and Trunks can easily counter this. And the confirm from far away allows the even better situation of shifting to Broly at the end of a kill. Broly's long reach generally gives Piccolo some stress, but the way in which it does this shifts a lot. It comes down to mostly whether or not Broly has to stand close enough to get clipped by Piccolo's out. And there once again. A forward recover was required, but the assist is ending up doing the cleanup there. Trunks, on the other hand, must rely on his defense in a lot of these situations. The opponent doesn't really want to get close to Trunks in the first place, and most of Trunks' ways to get close to them leave him relatively unsafe. He also has long enough recovery on most of those strongly approaching moves, that you're more so looking for a moment where your opponent is distracted and will be hit by them, than to use them and then cover that use with your assist to get pressure. He's not really so good at getting the pressure right afterward with most assists. And there's the delay button. Delay buttons are also helpful because you can usually hit them with complete confidence. The small delay allows you to choose which button to hit, and for many characters, especially in this game, this just means that you always have advantage as long as your opponent blocks or tries to move. But since most people won't want to just waste meter on an instant hard read, it's very unlikely that you'll get caught out for hitting these buttons. What you mostly need to worry about is the aforementioned use of assist, but that depends entirely on how strong your opponent's assist is at covering that space between you.
This should be a great fight.
As an example of this, Just Fine's team does not do a good job of protecting themselves in that delayed button situation. This is made up for by the fact that almost all of the characters have a quick way out of cornered or close neutral situations without having to think about it. This is a general style of play leading to a lot of defensive focus and ability to block through a lot of situations. There's no big payoff for doing this, but it isn't exactly terrible. And this is very effective using an offensive assist system. However, it does give the player a little bit of a better read on the situation. When your opponent is forced to use assist at a specific timing, and even to sometimes tailor the length of their combos around this, you can at least take some advantage of it. And above all, understand that your opportunity comes primarily at the moment where the assists are used up. Whether or not that opportunity means you should immediately attack or not is entirely up to you, but once they're gone, understand that the game has changed and you need to try to get into position to make it so without taking too long. This is one of the places where your vanish is one of the strongest options you have. Even if your opponent blocks the vanish, most characters that use this type of thing suffer at least somewhat from being pinned down by an opponent who has just seen you use both assists and decided to vanish at you or super dash at you in certain cases because of it. This is particularly true because a large part of what you're aiming to do against a player who has this type of skills, and in this case a player with this huge level of said skills, is to dismantle the team so that you don't have to deal with the assists and can rely more heavily on your defensive ability.
fight is anybody's guess.
As therefore we mentioned last week, we had one more topic to cover, and this is the precursor to that topic, specifically moving out of the way, but not assuming that because you have managed to get out of your opponent's situation that it is now your turn. And it has been strongly demonstrated during the stream, thankfully, that an opponent who has worked on accuracy well enough and understands the movement of their own characters can absolutely track you, even if it is by quote-unquote making a read. While you don't necessarily have to be in a defensive mental state, it is at least a scramble and not necessarily a chance for you to go on defensive. Facing better opponents with better tracking and, in some cases, better ability to deceive you into thinking that they have chased you when they haven't, slowly builds up your concept of what you're trying to do in the game. It's therefore important as the player trying to learn these things to understand what you need to practice in terms of tracking people. And, of course, since tracking players is very different than anything we can usually do with bots or particular ways of playing the game, mostly you have to practice this live. Our experience with certain other fighting games is that the CPU will just read your inputs and know where to go. It's not clear whether or not this happens in Dragon Ball FighterZ, as it's not really that sort of game where it matters a whole lot. But the CPU also has some really weird behaviors, so we don't generally spend a lot of time investigating it or playing it. Once again, you see it demonstrated there. Trunks absolutely could take the hits from one or two of Cell's beams, but the reward for actually getting over one of Cell's beams is quite large, especially with certain situations. Therefore, it's really not too detrimental to him to actually specifically dash forward and take some of that damage, either to discourage the opponent from throwing them, or to encourage it. Sometimes you can do both halves at the same time. In games where you can air tech, it's very important to learn to do this intentionally. But even in games where you do not have the option on everything, or you're just trapped in the corner and don't have tech as an option in a way that would get you out of it and have to rely on things like forward jumping over your opponent's head, it's really important to keep this in mind.
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
One particularly useful way to do this is when you think you're in a combo that you probably can't get out of, rather than looking for the way out of the combo, take a little time to take stock of your opponent's assist situation and your meter. Your opponent's meter often matters also, but generally that just means the combo will last longer. A few people are willing to save their meter just for the chase, but not a lot of them. Tracking becomes important at higher levels of the game due to the way players play neutral when they have heavy confidence in their ability to do damage. There is no reason to take a ton of risks at particular spaces in order to open the opponent up in neutral if you believe that once you do manage it, you will do a lot of damage anyway, and you can just wait for them to make certain mistakes. For example, if your tracking is superior and your combos are better, you will usually be able to win without having to put yourself at much risk at all. Opponents with lower accuracy will eventually miss, and eventually die. You can actually see this play out at high levels as well. When certain players face opponents who are super good at tracking or don't make mistakes in their offense, they often have to change the way they play altogether. But fear not, building up that skill of learning how to be more accurate in the chase eventually does force players with highly superior tracking to play some neutral. So it is just another skill on the ladder.
This should be a great fight.
But depending on the length of this match, it will be either the penultimate or last match of the night overall.
撃だ。5分。やっちなんだと終わりだ。やっぞなんだと大丈夫か。くそ無惨ぞ。くそ
うい
状態だ。どうしたと脅す。死になさい。宇宙の塵にしてやる。ちょっと脅してやるか。ちょっと脅す。いますよ。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。ちょっと脅す。
逃がさないぞ。修行の成果を見せてやる。
その調子。
あいつまだそら行くよ17号。
わかったわかった。
逃がさないぞ。まだそば見えた。順調
やるな。
行くよ。そらこいつはどうだい。何その面。
But if you take nothing more from this, remember that delayed buttons become stronger when your opponent does not have any assists to cover their defense. They have to get out of the way, and as a result of having to get out of the way, the chance of you hitting with such a delayed button is more. But it looks like this will be the final match of the night.
This should be a great fight.
There are no current plans for stream tomorrow, and nothing to specifically go into our variety hour, as we put it. But that doesn't mean that we'll have nothing. It's most likely going to be dead or alive if we do stream though. Heavy attempt to get Cell in, which does make sense given his ability to hold Broly in certain positions. But it was a little risky at the corner position as Broly no longer cares, forcing Cell to use meter or risks to reposition himself. We do expect to have our mishmashing battle on for Street Fighter V as normal on next Monday. And since this week was a break from both, we'll be here and the standby casual segment, which would have probably been under night. We're very likely to have at least one of those next week. But of course, you can join us in 1 week next Thursday for another Kame House. Most likely full duration. And possibly a look at the second half of this topic, given that the games we expect to play between there may not cover it. Therefore, this has been Rillian, 142MK. Good luck with your training, and good night, everyone.